Eyewitness, a Mick and Mack mystery. Welcome back to Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's true crime podcast. I'm Jay Nickel of Nickel Investigations, and you're listening to another Whodunit Wednesday, where we step into the world of classic detective fiction. 6 witnesses, 1 robbery, 1,000 contradictions. Everyone's a hero until the facts walk in. Go back to the golden era of detective fiction and enjoy stories in the tradition of the greats of writing, from Agatha Christie to Raymond Chandler to John Creasy. These are short stories. I hope you enjoy. Hello, I'm Jay Nickel of Nickel Investigations, and this is Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's true crime podcast. Ontario Cold Cases is a gripping true crime podcast that shines a light on unsolved murders, disappearances, and forgotten crimes from across the province and the world. With meticulous research, compelling storytelling, and a commitment to historical accuracy, we bring you the real stories of victims, investigators, and suspects, stories that demand to be heard. Each week, we take you deep into the world of true crime with a packed schedule of episodes. Tuesdays, historical true crime cases, exploring infamous and obscure crimes from history. Wednesdays, the Mick and Mack mysteries, a thrilling fictional detective series set in 1950s Toronto. Thursdays, World Cold Case Thursday, investigating unsolved cases from around the globe. Sundays, Ontario Cold Cases, the latest episode uncovering an unsolved mystery from Ontario. From high-profile crimes that shock the nation to little-known cases waiting for justice, we uncover the truth, one case at a time. Join us as we explore the dark corners of history and mystery, where every clue could lead to answers and every case deserves a second look. Subscribe now wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts and never miss an episode of Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's true crime podcast. Chapter 1. The Not-So-Great Bank Job. The Dominion Trust Bank sat in the corner of King and Simcoe, nestled between a hat shop and a tobacconist that swore their pipes were favoured by Winston Churchill himself. It was a crisp morning in early autumn, kind of day when the air smelled like fallen leaves and coffee grounds, and the sidewalks clinked with the polished shoes of a city trying to get back on its feet after the war. McCathie and MacNeely stood in front of the bank, surveying a scene that felt oddly underwhelming for what dispatch had called an armed robbery in progress. There was a small crowd, sure, curious onlookers with their collars turned up and their noses turned in. A boy selling newspapers, a matron with a shopping bag full of carrots. But no screaming, no police line, no ambulance, not even a shattered window. I've seen more excitement at a church bake sale, Mac muttered, tipping his fedora back with one finger. Mick's eyes scanned the building. You think someone being held at gunpoint might at least wrinkle their suit. Just then the bank doors opened, and a man in a too neat 3-piece suit stepped out with theatrical concern painted across his face. His hair was slicked back with enough pomade to grease a trolley track. His pocket square looked like it had been ironed into submission. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," he said, rushing toward them, with arms extended like a man accepting an award. Mick resisted the urge to check for spotlights. "Cyril Fenwick," the man said, offering his hand. "Bank manager, Dominion Trust. We had a most unfortunate situation just minutes ago." "Is that so?" said Mick, shaking the hand out of politeness but not conviction. Fenwick nodded gravely. "Yes, a lone bandit, bold as brass, walked in, produced a pistol, and demanded our day's till." No shots fired? Mac asked, glancing over the man's shoulder toward the bank's undisturbed windows. Oh, heavens, no, Fenwick said with a dramatic shiver. I calmed him. De-escalated the situation, as they say. Heroism, really, though I shan't toot my own horn. I'll get it for you if you like, Mac said under his breath. Mick cleared his throat. And your staff? Anyone hurt? Not at all, Fenwick beamed. My tellers were the picture of professionalism, cool under pressure. Very proud of them. He led them through the heavy brass-trimmed doors and into the marble interior of the bank. It was tidy. Too tidy. The kind of place where a robbery should at least have knocked over a fiscus or two. Behind the tall walnut counters, two bank tellers looked up expectantly. Allow me to introduce Miss Vivian Dupree, Mr. Al Bronsky, Fenwick said with a flourish. Our frontline defenders. Vivian adjusted her hat and gave them a look of practiced composure. She wore a navy blue dress with matching gloves, and her lips were the precise shade of red seen in wartime recruitment posters. She held a lace handkerchief in one hand like it had been through something traumatic, even though it looked freshly pressed. It was dreadful, she said breathfully. But I didn't flinch, not once. I looked that man in the eye and said, Sir, you'll not rattle me today. Bronsky, a square-shouldered man with a tie that screamed ambition, stepped forward. I was this close, he said, holding two fingers about an inch apart. One more second, I'd have jumped the counter, took him down myself. Wasn't that a little dangerous, Mick asked. Bronsky shrugged. Maybe. You don't work a window if you're afraid of action. Max scratched his head. And the guy just ran out? Bolted, said Bronsky, like a scared rabbit. Vivian chimed in. It was all very sudden, but I must say, Mr. Fenwick was remarkably brave. Kept us calm. Fenwick beamed again. I simply did what any good Canadian would do in a crisis. Mick gave a non-committal grunt and looked around the room. 3 customers sat waiting on a bench near the entrance, sipping complimentary tea from porcelain cups. They didn't look like victims of a recent crime. Fenwick followed his gaze. Ah, yes, our witnesses, troopers, each of them, shall I? Please, Mick said. The first was an elderly woman with a sharp nose and a handbag the size of a coal scuttle. She stood up before being asked. Name's Dolores Tansey, she said crisply. Retired teacher. Latin and mathematics. Max smiled. So you like things to add up? I do, she said, jabbing the cane she wasn't using for walking against the floor. And let me tell you, that hooligan didn't expect to meet a woman who fought in the Blitz. You served in London, Mick asked. Volunteered in the shelters. Gave more boys a wallop with this bag than I can count. She held up the handbag. Still got my bricks in there. Hit him right on the elbow. You hit him, Mac asked. Would have knocked the pistol clean out of his hand if he hadn't flinched. Next came a young man, leaning cockily against the marble wall. He wore a leather jacket, a sneer, a confident curl to his lip that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror. Stan Kowalski, he said. Stan the man. Self-given, Mick asked. Stan grinned. Name or title? Max snorted. Anyhow, Stan continued. As soon as he made his move, I was ready. Trained, you know. Army, signal corps. But I got reflexes like a cat. Took a few steps toward him, but didn't want to risk the old lady here. Mrs. Tansey gave me a look that could have cracked plaster. So you didn't stop him, Mick said. Didn't need to, Stan replied. He knew I was on him. Chased him out the door, kept to the shadows. Lost him after a few blocks, but I got a good look at the guy. Big ears, nervous. And the gun? Didn't even blink, Stan said. Guy was all show. Last on the bench was a bookish fellow in a brown suit that had seen better days. He had a thick pair of spectacles, a notepad on his lap, and a general air of quiet confusion. I'm Dr. Ewan Leonard, he said softly. I teach paleobotany at the university. Mick raised an eyebrow. You were here during the robbery? Leonard nodded. Yes,
I came in to withdraw rent. It all happened very quickly. Can you describe it? Well, I'm not sure. I saw a man approach the counter. He said something. Then he left. Wasn't much shouting, just movement. No gun? Leonard shook his head. I didn't see one, but I suppose he could have had it hidden. Anything stand out? Mac asked. Leonard hesitated. I think Mr. Fenwick might have shaken his hand, but I could be mistaken. I wasn't wearing my strongest lenses. Mick scribbled in his notebook. Mac looked up and caught his eye. The look said everything. Either this was the politest stick-up in Toronto history, or someone was selling fiction by the cupful. Chapter 2. 7 Versions of Glory. Back at Division Street Station, Room 4 was reserved for the kind of interviews that required either a soft touch or a hard drink. Mick and Mack had opted for the former, though Mack was already eyeing the clock like he'd earned the latter. A chalkboard stood at the front of the room, halfway from a lecture the night before on traffic code violations. Mack claimed it as his canvas and drew a crude diagram of the bank interior, labeling the windows, doors, and one oddly muscular stick figure, labeled robber. Ready for the first actor? Mack asked, chalk in hand. Mick nodded. Send in Churchill. Fenwick's account. Cyril Fenwick entered like he expected applause. His suit had gained a boutonniere since they last saw him, a white carnation, which Mick strongly suspected he carried for moments of personal triumph. I thought I'd begin by saying, Fenwick announced, taking a seat, that in moments of crisis, one must remain calm. Leadership, gentlemen. Poise. Resolve. You were saying something about a gunman, Mick prompted. Indeed. He burst in. Well, he strode in, but with menace, and waved a pistol. A Luger, I believe. German made, quite rude. And then I saw the panic in the eyes of my staff. I knew I had to act. I engaged him in a calm, diplomatic tone. Delayed him. Subtly gestured for Vivian and Al to duck. I suspect it was my stalling tactics that prevented tragedy. Mac raised an eyebrow. So you negotiate with an armed man? Much like Churchill at Yalta, Fenwick said, steepling his fingers. It was a psychological chess match, quite exhilarating. He stood, demonstrating a vague arm motion that might have been a gesture of peace or an awkward mime routine. Mick jotted something down. Mac, meanwhile, added a monocle to the stick figure labeled Fenwick. Vivian's account. Vivian Dupree glided in next, like a noir dame auditioning for parts she'd already written. Her gloves were still on, her lipstick freshly reapplied. It was dreadful, she sighed, but I remembered my training. Bank training, Mick asked. No, finishing school. The first rule of crisis. Keep your back straight and your jaw firm. And then what happened? Vivian leaned in, eyes wide. He had a young woman by the wrist. Said he'd hurt her if anyone moved. But I noticed he was nervous, sweating, his hand shook. No one else mentioned a hostage, Mick said carefully. She waved this off. It was implied. The way he looked at me, I knew. So while he was distracted, I reached for my letter opener, a gift from my cousin in Paris, and held it under the counter, ready to strike. You intended to stab him? Mac asked, eyes wide. I didn't intend anything, but I was prepared to act. Did you act? Vivian sighed. He ran before I had to. A coward in the end. Mac wrote, letter opener duel, next to her name, and added a sword to her chalk figure. Al's account. Al Bronski marched in like a man late to a boxing match and ready to hit something. His tie was crooked now, and he thumped the back of the chair before sitting. "Let's get this straight. I know you took that guy down." "That's what we heard," Mick said. "You want to walk us through it?" "Sure. I'm behind the counter, right? Doing some quick mental math. 7 deposits, 2 withdrawals of war bonds." Mack yawned. Then boom. In comes this punk, waving a pistol like he's starring one of them gangster pictures. He starts yelling. I keep cool. Slide my hand under the counter, trigger the alarm. Alarm didn't go off, Mick noted. I must have malfunctioned. Anyway, I vault the counter, almost grabbed him. He shoved me. Let him go, didn't want to escalate. So you had him, but let him go? Better safe than sorry. Mack added a cape to Al's chalk figure and labeled it Al the Brave. Mrs. Tansey's account. Dolores Tansey didn't sit. She stood, cane in hand like she was ready to deliver a lecture or a beatdown. I've taught boys like him before, she said. Slouched posture, no respect, no Latin. Mick blinked. He spoke Latin? He didn't. That's the problem. Right. So what did you do? I stared him down. Called him a coward. Told me he'd never amount to anything. Might have shaken him to his core. No physical contact? I raised my bag, she said proudly. He ran. Mack grinned as he drew a handbag twice the size of Mrs. Tansey on the chalkboard. Weapon of choice. Maternal guilt. Stan the Man Kowalski's account. Stan slouched into the room, spinning a coin between his fingers and smirking like he owned the building. So there I am, minding my business when the guy busts in. Busts in, Mick asked. He said before he strolled in. Did I? Anyway, he's got a gun, real shiny, big. Might have been a Thompson. Mick blinked. A Tommy gun? Stan shrugged. Could have been. I don't scare easy. I spring into action, duck behind a pillar, scan for exits, check the angles. I'm all over it. And then I follow him out. Tail him for a few blocks. Try to intercept, but he ducks into an alley. I don't chase. Didn't want to spook him. Got a good look at him? Oh yeah. Average height or tall. Maybe dark-haired. Hard to say. I was in combat mode. Mack labeled his chalk figure Ranger Stan and drew smoke bombs and a grappling hook. Dr. Leonard's account. Dr. Ewan Leonard entered timidly, holding his notebook like it might protect him from difficult questions. I'm afraid I wasn't terribly helpful, he said, adjusting his glasses. It was all very undramatic. No shouting? No. In fact, I thought it might have been a private meeting at first. The man walked in, they exchanged a few words, and he left. I didn't even realize anything had happened until Miss Dupree gasped and said we'd been robbed. Gun? I didn't see one. He had a coat, but it was buttoned. Anything else? Dr. Leonard hesitated. I think Mr. Fenwick may have shaken his hand, though I wasn't wearing my strongest lenses. Mack underlined shake on the chalkboard 3 times and wrote, too calm to be true. By the end of the afternoon, the chalkboard was an exploded diagram of contradictions. 1 man with 5 voices, 3 escape routes, and apparently 2 different types of firearms. Mick stared at it, arms folded. Mack stood beside him, chalk dust on his sleeve, frowning at his own artwork. If everyone's a hero, Mack said finally, why didn't they stop the guy? Mick tapped his pencil on the drawing of Dr. Leonard, the only stick figure without a cape, sword, or handbag the size of a bulldog. Because maybe, he said, he's the only one who wasn't acting. Chapter 3. One Truth Too Many. Back at the station, the evidence board looked less like a crime scene diagram, more like a surrealist painting. Mack had tied together witness names with red string, but somewhere along the line the strings had started looping, crossing, and doubling back until it looked like someone had tried to knit a sweater out of confusion. Mick stood with his hands in his pockets, reading over his notes for the 5th time. Mack sat backward on a chair, chin resting on the backrest, like he was waiting for it all to make sense on its own. "Well," Mack said finally, "I think we've cracked it." Mick raised an eyebrow. "The robber," Mack said, tapping the board, "was a ghost." Mick didn't dignify that with a response. "I mean, think about it," Mack went on, pointing at the chalkboard. "Fenwick says he walked in at 10:15. Al swears it was 10:30. Vivian's clock said 10:45. So unless he robbed the place 3 times, Mick said, someone's lying. Or all of them are. Let's keep going." He pulled down a small stack of tight witness reports. Fenwick says the guy was soft-spoken. Vivian claims he was shouting threats like it was the front line of Dieppe. Mrs. Tansey said he had a limp. Stan says he leapt over the counter like a jackrabbit, which, Mack flipped the page, is funny because Al says he vaulted the counter and nearly tackled the guy. Only Mrs. Tansey said she'd hit him with her handbag. Nobody mentioned that part except her. Or the part where he took a hostage, Mick said dryly. That was just Vivian. And Stan the man says he chased him through downtown like he was starring in the Maltese Falcon. Without anyone else noticing, Mick added. No bystanders, no reports, no footprints. Not even a hat left behind. Mack leaned back and laced his fingers behind his head. "So let me get this straight. We've got a robber with a limp, a spring in his step, a megaphone, and a whisper. Either he's a circus act or we're being had," Mick finished. There was a long pause. Then Mack said, "We ought to talk to the only guy who didn't claim to wrestle a tiger." Interview. Dr. Ewan Leonard. Again. They found Dr. Ewan Leonard where one might expect. Sitting in his office at the university surrounded by dusty books, faded fern specimens, and the smell of chalk and old tea. He greeted them with mild surprise and offered each of them a boiled sweet from a dish shaped like a trilobite. "Dr. Leonard," Mick began, declining the candy, "I'd like to clarify a few things about what you saw." "I was afraid of that," Leonard said, adjusting his glasses. I'm afraid I wasn't terribly observant. It all happened rather fast." "Tell us again what you remember," Mick said gently. Leonard closed his eyes a moment, gathering the memory like loose papers in a breeze. "He walked in," he said. "Not rushed. Just entered, like any customer." "No shouting?" Mack asked. "No. In fact, I don't recall hearing anything until Miss Dupree raised her voice. It seemed calm." "Did anyone scream? Panic?" Mick asked. Leonard shook his head. "Not until afterward. People didn't even stand up." "And what did the man do?" "He walked straight to the counter, to Miss Dupree. She seemed to expect him." He frowned, or perhaps I imagined that, but I remember thinking it was very familiar. Mick jotted this down. "You still think you saw Fenwick shake his hand?" Leonard hesitated. "Yes, just before the man left. Though I admit my eyesight isn't perfect from that distance. Still, it looked like a handshake, brief, formal." Mack raised an eyebrow. "You didn't grab the cash and run?" Leonard blinked. "No, I saw no gun, no yelling. Just an exchange. And then he walked out." Mick closed his notebook and looked at Leonard. "Thank you, Doctor. You've been more helpful than you know." As they left the office, Mack leaned in. You thinking what I'm thinking? Mick didn't look at him. I'm thinking someone staged a robbery and forgot to tell the guy with the clipboard. Mac chuckled. You don't shake a man's hand after he steals from you. Mick paused at the top of the steps, flipping his notebook closed. What kind of robbery, he murmured, gets a handshake? Chapter 4. The Truth Behind the Tall Tales. Dominion Trust looked just as it had the day before. Polished brass, spotless marble, not a single sign that anyone had brandished a weapon inside its walls. If anything, it looked cleaner. Too clean. Mick and Mack stepped inside unannounced, coats buttoned against the morning chill, fedoras tipped forward like storm clouds. Vivian Dupree greeted them with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Well, if it isn't Toronto's finest, she said with forced brightness. Back to slay more dragons? Something like that, Mac said, eyeing her gloves. You still carrying your letter opener? She let out a musical laugh. Retired it, for now. Al Bronski was behind the counter, counting bills with exaggerated focus. When he looked up, he flashed a grin a bit too wide. Need a withdrawal, fellas? Courage? Truth? Coffee? Maybe all three, Mick said, scanning the room. Vivian moved to offer them chairs. Tea, even. Some sugar cookies in a tin with a picture of the king on it. The whole production had the feel of a play entering its third act. Rehearsed, polished, but slightly too eager to keep the audience from leaving. Mick's eyes settled on the wall behind the teller booth. Specifically, the small gray box marked alarm. The cover was ajar, revealing a hollow metal shell. But more to the point, no wires. He looked at Mac, who nodded slightly. Time to split up. Mac versus Fenwick. Mac peeled off toward the manager's office, whistling something jaunty and knocking on the open door. Fenwick stood beside his desk, rearranging paperweights like he expected a royal inspection. Mr. Fenwick, Mac said, easing into a chair. Just thought we'd have a little follow-up chat. Of course. Anything for the constabulary, Fenwick said, gesturing with a smile that showed too many teeth. Mac leaned back. Funny thing about yesterday, everyone was so coordinated. We value teamwork here, Fenwick said. I'll bet, Mac said. And that alarm box out there. I've seen more wiring in a pencil sharpener. Fenwick chuckled nervously. Old thing's always malfunctioning. We've meant to upgrade it. Ah, and you said you triggered it yourself. Yes, or rather, I attempted to. Might not have. Connected properly. Uh-huh, Max said. Funny how that happens. Meanwhile, back in the office. Mick had slipped quietly past the corridor behind the teller booth and into the accounting room, which was kept locked only by a brass latch a child could outwit. Inside was neat as a pin, ledgers stacked, an adding machine, large safe tucked into the corner. Mick went straight for the main ledger, flipping through its most recent entries. And there it was. 3 cash entries. All within the past week. V. Dupree. Disbursement. $200. A. Bronski. Disbursement. $200. D. Tansey. Disbursement. $100. Next page. Kowalski S. Cash bonus. $150. Each marked with an internal code labeled Client Retention, Discretionary. There is even a line for C. Fenwick, Security Coordination Allowance. Mick exhaled slowly, and closed the book. The confrontation. Back in Fenwick's office, Mac was just winding up a story about a raccoon and a pickpocket when Mick stepped in, holding the ledger like a priest with a sermon. "Interesting accounting, Mr. Fenwick," Mick said, placing the book down on the desk. Fenwick's eyes flicked to it, then back to Mick. "Performance bonuses," he said smoothly. "Incentives, quite standard." "For a robbery?" Mick asked. Fenwick chuckled again. That same brittle, rehearsed chuckle. "Oh, detective, I think you're reading too much into it. I think I'm reading exactly what it says. One last visit. Dr. Leonard." They found Dr. Leonard later that afternoon in a quiet corner of the university library, nose deep, in a dusty volume titled Devonian Flora, the Carboniferous Divide. He looked up, surprised but not displeased. "Oh, I hoped I hadn't said anything misleading." "You've been the only one who hasn't," Mick said. Leonard blinked. "That's comforting, I think." Mac pulled up a chair. "You mentioned something yesterday about the man going straight to the counter." Leonard nodded. "Yes, he walked directly to Mr. Pre's window, as though he'd been there before, or as though someone had told him which drawer to use." "You didn't happen to notice anyone reaching for it before you arrived?" Mick asked. Leonard looked thoughtfully, then nodded slowly. "Yes, actually, I believe Mr. Bronsky opened it. Briefly, before the man reached the counter. I remember because I thought he'd forgotten something, but it was an odd timing." "Did it look like an accident?" Mick asked. "No," Leonard said. "It looked deliberate." He paused and added, "I don't normally bank there, you know. The usual branch is on University Avenue, but they're doing renovations." Mick stood. "Dr. Leonard, you've been very helpful. Again." Leonard smiled faintly. "I'm not sure how. I just saw what I saw." As they walked back toward the station, Mac rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. So he wasn't even supposed to be there. "Nope," Mick said. "Wrong place, right time." "Exactly." Mac looked over at his partner. "So what are we thinking now?" Mick didn't break stride. "I think the robbery wasn't a robbery," he said. "It was a play. Dr. Leonard wandered into the theater by mistake." Chapter 5. Cracking the Consensus. The next morning, Mick and Mack invited all 6 witnesses to the community room of Division Street Station. An echoey old chamber that smelled faintly of radiator heat, mimeograph ink, and cold coffee. The long table in the center was polished but scarred, as if it had seen too many city budget meetings and not enough truths. The guests filed in, each with a slightly different expression. Vivian wore a look of theatrical confidence. Al looked like he'd overshined his shoes in preparation. Fenwick maintained his veneer of eager cooperation. Mrs. Tansey's handbag looked heavier than ever. Stan cracked his knuckles like he was prepping for a prize fight, and Dr. Leonard sat at the far end, looking politely confused. Max stood at the front, arms folded. Mick stood beside him with a folder thick enough to cause damage if thrown. "Appreciate everyone coming back," Mick said, opening the folder and not looking up. "We just need to tie a few details together. Shouldn't take long." "You mean like a debrief?" Fenwick asked. "Happy to assist. Always glad to help with civic order." "Oh, we figured you would be," Max said. "Especially since the little girls saw the whole thing pointed you out." There was a pause. Heads turned. "I beg your pardon?" Fenwick asked. "Oh yeah," Mac continued. "Cute kid, about 7. Standing outside the whole time. Said she saw everything through the window. Vivian paled just a shade. What did she see exactly? Al asked, voice trying too hard to sound casual. She said the man who came in didn't look like a robber at all. Said he smiled, tipped his hat, and that none of you looked scared. Said it looked more like rehearsal. Silence. Mick picked up the thread. Of course, we also have an auditor poking around. City Hall is interested. Always gets jumpy when bonus funds move around this quickly. He opened the folder and began laying out slips of paper like playing cards. Funny thing, he said, each of you had a sizable deposit just before the robbery. He slid the slips across the table. Vivian Dupree, $200. Al Bronski, $200. Dolores Tansey, $100. Stan Kowalski, $150. Stan scratched his head. That could have been, tips. You a bellhop, Mac asked. I do some driving on the side. For who? Stan paused. Various clients? Mick didn't blink. Miss Tansey, said you struck the robber with your handbag, correct? Indeed, right on the elbow. Funny, Mick said, flipping through notes. Yesterday he told us he ducked before he could strike. Today he landed it? Well, she straightened her coat. I may have misremembered. And the money in your account, Mick asked? I needed it. If you must know, she snapped, then froze. That is, I mean... Wait, Mac said, feigning surprise. I thought you were the hero. A beat. A long one. Stan leaned back. Now hold on. I said I'll save the day. No, Mick said. You said Vivian saved the day. Yesterday. Today you said it was Fenwick. Stan looked around. Maybe they all did. Group effort. Vivian and Al exchanged a glance. A long, meaningful glance. Mick saw it. So did Mac. I'm curious, Mick said smoothly. What do you all make of Dr. Leonard's version of events? All heads turned to the quiet academic, who looked up from his folded hands. I didn't think it was very dramatic, he said. It was all quite civil, really. Fenwick coughed. Well, it wouldn't rely too heavily on the account of a botanist. Paleobotanist, Leonard corrected gently. Mick reached in the folder one last time and pulled out a final slip. You know, your cousin's name showed up in a few cross-border inquirers recently. Something about a speeding ticket in Buffalo, just after a reported bank withdrawal. Fenwick stiffened. That's circumstantial. It's also interesting, Mick said. He left Canada the same day this whole charade went down, with a burlap sack and a very fake mustache. Mac stepped forward, cracking his knuckles for emphasis. You all rehearsed the same fake robbery, he said. He didn't rehearse a backup story. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Fenwick's shoulders slumped. All right, he muttered. Fine. Vivian looked outraged. Cyril! Oh, come off it, Fenwick snapped. They've got the deposits, the notes, the paleobotanist. We're sunk. Al groaned. Stan cursed under his breath. Miss Tansey said something in Latin. It sounded like a scolding. It's supposed to be simple, Fenwick said. My cousin would come in, grab the cash, disappear across the border. No threats, no one hurt. Everyone gets a cut. It was clean. Except it wasn't, Mick said, because he didn't count on Dr. Leonard. Who? Stan asked. The only person in the room wasn't part of the play, Mick said, and the only one who noticed the performance. Chapter 6. Eyewitness. Everything. The sign on the door of Dominion Trust read, "Closed for police business," which didn't stop 3 separate customers from trying to open it anyway. Inside, the chairs were rearranged into a rough semicircle, the lighting a little too bright, the atmosphere thick with forced smiles, and the distinct aroma of nervous sweat. "Thank you all for coming," Mick said, hands behind his back. "This morning, we're conducting a scene reconstruction. Nothing formal, just want to walk through what happened. Together." Vivian fluttered her lashes. "Of course, detective, it's important to be thorough." Al straightened his tie. Fenwick clasped his hands behind his back like a man about to conduct a military parade. "Who'd like to begin?" Mick asked. "Mr. Dupree, perhaps?" Vivian launched into her tale with practiced elegance. Letter opener gleaming in the spotlight of her memory, the robber trembling before her steely resolve. She mimed ducking behind the counter and whispered, "I told him he'd have to get through me first." Before the echoes of that line faded, Al jumped in. No, I remember it differently. I leapt over the counter first. Nearly had the guy in a headlock before he bolted." "It's not what you said yesterday," Stan muttered. Al shot him a look. "You weren't even near the counter." "I was behind that pillar," Stan snapped, ready to pounce. "I had the best angle." Mrs. Tansey stood abruptly, handbag clutched like a war trophy. "You're all talking rot. The man flinched when I stood. I glared him into submission. None of you so-called gentlemen did a thing." "Oh, come off it," Al snapped. "You were hiding behind a potted fern. I was shielding civilians." Fenwick clapped loudly, trying to regain control. "Please, let's not descend into chaos. We must maintain composure in a—" "Pipe down, Cyril," Stan growled. "You told me to say it was Vivian who saved the day." Vivian turned sharply. "I what?" "And you told me to save Al saved the day," Miss Tansey added. "That's because I needed consistency," Fenwick barked. "You can't stage a robbery without a little choreography." Silence. A long one. Mick cleared his throat. "That's, quite a rehearsal." Then he stepped aside to reveal Dr. Ewan Leonard, who quietly entered through the side door clutching a soft brown hat. "Dr. Leonard," Mick said, "if you wouldn't mind." Leonard adjusted his glasses and stepped forward. "Well," he began awkwardly, "I was sitting right over there. I saw a man walking. He wasn't shouting. No gun that I could see. He went directly to Mr. Dupree's window, and Mr. Bronsky had already opened the drawer." He glanced around the room. Miss Dupree didn't seem afraid. In fact, it looked like she expected him. Murmurs. Leonard continued, calm and precise. "I didn't think much of it, but then Mr. Fenwick came out, and I'm fairly sure he shook the man's hand before he left. That's when everyone started behaving like something dramatic had occurred." Mick stepped forward again. Bank records confirmed the cash drawer was opened before the so-called robber arrived. Alarm system? Disconnected. Deposits into your accounts? All within 48 hours of the incident. He turned toward the group. "We've also recovered a burlap sack containing the exact amount reported stolen. Your robber, Mr. Fenwick's cousin, was picked up in Niagara Falls this morning, claiming to be Maurice from New Jersey. Terrible accent, fake mustache, really quite sad." Fenwick slumped into a chair. "I told him not to use the mustache," he mumbled. Vivian sighed dramatically. "Do you suppose this means I'm not getting my bonus?" Later that night, at Rosie DeLuca's bar. The piano played softly and the lights were low. Cozy haze hung in the air, scented with tobacco, whiskey, and warm laughter. Rosie wiped a glass behind the bar, her red hair glowing like a beacon under the hanging bulbs. In a corner booth, Dr. Leonard sat stiffly, sipping a ginger ale. Rosie leaned over, her tone amused. "So you're the honest one, huh?" Leonard blinked. "I Suppose. You're a rare breed, sweetheart. You didn't embellish a word. Refreshing. He looked down bashfully. I just described what I saw. Rosie smiled. It's all a real witness needs to do. Back at the booth with Mick and Mack. Mick nursed a rime water. Mack was halfway through a lager, flipping a coin between sips. Well, Mick said, we finally found one. One what? Mack asked. A witness who didn't think he was the star of the picture. Mack grinned, raising his glass. To Dr. Leonard, he said, may all our future witnesses be botanists. Paleobotanists, Mick corrected. They clinked glasses. Mack leaned back and gave a satisfied sigh. I like this kind of witness, he said. The kind who doesn't need a cape. And that's the end for tonight. Thank you for listening. This has been Ontario Cold Cases, and I'm Jay Nickel of Nickel Investigations.